Telltale. I'm Emily.
I'm Greg.
And today we are going to be looking at The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells.
And this was his third novel, written in 1896, I believe, or published in 1896. His second work of science fiction after The Time Machine. His second novel, The Wonderful Visit, was comedy fantasy. Very good novel if you want to read it. But this, of course, is one of his most famous works. I've got it in the works of H.G. Wells, with Time Machine, Invisible Man, First Man in the Moon, Food of the Gods, and War of the Worlds. He wrote it at a time when he was friends with Joseph Conrad, and the two of them had discussions. And their discussions in Conrad's case led to the book Heart of Darkness. And in Wells's case, it led to The Island of Dr. Moreau. The two works couldn't possibly be more different, but yet there is still some basic thinking behind the two of them that is related. And The Island of Dr. Moreau, of course, does draw upon a tradition in the 1800s of mad scientists and the nature of man, exploring the nature of man, coming after Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Our three books for the month, our three horror books for the month are thematically related. But of course, Wells took things in a completely different direction, making his story more scientific than the others, and founding what we know today as science fiction. In my opinion, more so than Jules Verne did. You know, Jules Verne came up with some cool contraptions, but H.G. Wells actually thought about how science was impacting society and made observations about society through scientific situations, which is really what science fiction is all about. So, synopsis.
Yeah, so the synopsis is this gentleman is on a boat and meets this doctor and his buddy who kind of are really keeping to themselves about their work and what they do, and through some unusual circumstances this man kind of gets commandeered on their island with them because there's a mutiny on the boat that they were traveling on, and basically he got kicked off for, I can't remember specifically what had occurred. It was kind of like a series of small things that happened that kind of built up, and they were just like, we're kicking you off the boat.
Yeah.
So he kind of gets stuck on this island with these two guys, and the two guys are really protective of their work. They're not really showing him or revealing to him what they're doing. They kind of tell him not to go places without them, and like they're just being really, really weird. And then he finds out that they are taking animals and basically reconstructing them surgically to be like beast men. They're trying to like basically make them humanoid, and eventually try to see if they can get them to be civilized. So it's actually really gruesome because they're like, they don't use anesthetics or anything really. They're just kind of pulling apart they're pulling apart these animals and putting them back together with, you know, human parts and cadavers that they have, and, you know, weird stuff. It's actually kind of like really sad. If you're in PETA, you won't like this story at all. It's terrible. But so he ends up kind of encountering, he goes out and about and he encounters like this tribe of the beast people, and they have this series of laws that were kind of made up to help civilize them by the two doctors who are building this society, I guess, this experimental society on this island. And every so often the beast people kind of fall back into instinctual behavior where they'll kill each other, or, you know, the predators will become predatorial again for a brief moment, and then they break the law and they have to die in accordance with their laws. So eventually, it all kind of starts to backfire. The beast men kind of all go nuts, and the two doctors end up getting killed by the beast people. And our main character, who's narrating, I can't remember his name. What was his name again?
Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, our main character kind of makes a new law saying they're not really dead, they're coming back. To kind of, like, bide his time to see if he can get off the island, and eventually a boat wanders up on the island and the beastmen go and attack or look through to see if anybody's in it, and while they're distracted he steals the boat and goes back onto the ocean because he's like, I'd rather die there than die here being torn apart by these people or beings or whatever. So a lot of his time is just like spent trying to survive and not get eaten or killed by these beastmen sort of things. It's just really interesting, though, because their society is so... Like, they basically had to make this 10 Commandments sort of deal to make sure they didn't as frequently fall back into predatorial or instinctual behaviors. And it's just really, really interesting concept and very horrifying.
Yeah, and a couple of interesting things about it. First of all, Wells wrote this after having gone through school for biology and studying with T.H. Huxley. He was well-grounded in biology, well-grounded in Darwinism and evolutionary theory at the time. And so he wrote this out from a standpoint of being one of the most knowledgeable people about such things. And this was at a time when concepts like eugenics were starting to be formulated by people, which of course would ultimately lead to the Nazis. And Wells was seeing that and seeing where that could lead, seeing where it could do bad things. And Wells, of course, doesn't go into detail of the process here, just that it's kind of surgical. But eventually we did discover something that wasn't known in Wells' day, which would allow this sort of thing, and that is genetics. Wells was writing, if he would have figured out something about genetics at the time, I mean, that would just make this novel so incredible if he would have put that into his story. But of course, it was way too soon for anybody to have thought of such a thing. But he did write about a scientific process here that does very much mirror genetics today and what is capable with genetics. And the other thing is that Wells wasn't, Wells wrote a horror story here, and it is a very terrifying story. Even more terrifying when you know what Wells really was trying to get at with this whole story. But Wells is always called the father of science fiction because he wrote about, aliens and spaceships and time travel and stuff like that. But what a lot of people forget is that he was a master of horror. He wrote ghost stories. He wrote horror stories. He wrote stories like The Island of Dr. Moreau. And as much or possibly even more than any other of the horror writers of his time, he was able to truly capture a terrifying and grotesque atmosphere in his stories to make you really, really scared of what's going on and really terrify you as much as any book could really be terrifying. But what is most terrifying about this is that H.G. Wells was not trying to write he wasn't trying to write a horror story. He wasn't trying to write a story about the science. He really wasn't concerned about the process of turning these animals into human-like form. What he was interested in was doing something like Animal Farm does and mirroring our real society with this weird, wild situation on this island. And in doing so, he was making the point. And he even states it at the end of the book, when the character is back in London and looking at the people around him and thinking about what he had been through and what he's seeing in London, makes the point that the only thing keeping us from that horrible cannibalistic barbarism is our laws. Without those, we would devolve into the creatures that were on this island. He was basically making, what's the word I'm looking for? Using this fantastic situation as
An
a
allegory.
symbol, allegory, that's
Yep.
what I wanted, as an allegory of what Wells was seeing in real society. And once again, you got to remember, this was an era of Jack the Ripper. That Wells, this was after Jack the Ripper that Wells wrote this book. And so people were seeing, and here in America we had a couple of really, really horrific mass murders.
The serial killer. The beginnings of serial killing.
Yeah, well, it was going on before that.
Yeah, but it was more popularized, and as technology increased, the information being passed about them became, it just became faster to communicate.
It also must have seemed to Wells like as we became more civilized, the opposite was being magnified as well. The horrible things we were doing became so much more horrible. And I don't know if it was just that it was being reported more all of a sudden, or if we really were being, in a way, dehumanized by our civilization. And so people had this need to go the opposite direction.
To rebel and commit atrocities.
And so that's what Wells was saying, is that we really aren't better than animals. We just have laws that we adhere to. And I kind of disagree with that, because I feel that most people would not descend totally into barbarism. Our laws are the product of our desire to be more and to be good and to see good in ourselves and control the evil in ourselves. We would never have written those laws if we didn't ultimately want to be more than animals.
And I think too, like, I had a lot of flashbacks to the Lord of the Flies when reading this, where you kind of have this barbarism versus civility and what that looks like, what that means, what questions do we pose to the social contract as human beings, and why do we adhere to, like, what is our motivation ultimately for choosing to follow the rules or not choosing to follow the rules. And I kept, like, coming back to, is this a desire to do good, or is it fear of rejection? And those who are not afraid,
or retaliation.
Yeah, or retaliation. Are they afraid of being rejected by their society and confined, or are they don't care, like sociopathic versus somebody who isn't a sociopath kind of thing? I had a lot of questions about those as I was reading this, because yes, we are a tribe that innately wants to be connected to the tribe. We're herd animals, essentially. Humans are herd animals. But I thought what was interesting is that most of what the examples you get in Island of Dr. Moreau are not herd animals at all. A lot of the time they're lone hunters, or they live in community but conduct business, so to speak, singularly. I just thought that was really interesting comparison, because we do have these outliers in society who become serial killers, people who are sociopaths who commit atrocities, things like that. And there is psychologically a lack of ability to, one, understand consequences, and two, care that there are consequences in the first place. So I thought that was really interesting, kind of in comparison to these animals that are being forced to go against their nature, which is literally to lack care for the laws of, it's a survival of the fittest versus the social contract situation. I just thought that was really well portrayed in this story. It was a good one.
And I've been rereading H.G. Wells, as well as reading stuff I've never read by him. for a few years now, trying to read everything chronologically, everything I can get my hands on anyway. And so far, I've read through most of his early science fiction stories, and I'm starting to get into his first realistic novels. And in general, I'm being impressed by the depth of thought in all of Wells's work that I didn't see when I was a teenager reading Wells. But I also was blown away by The Island of Dr. Moreau in particular, because this seemed to go deeper than any of the rest of Wells's books. I would say, if I were to say which Wells novel so far of what I've read is the greatest Wells novel, I'd have to say Island of Dr. Moreau.
It definitely has a lot of ethics and philosophical questions that it poses and addresses. I thought what was interesting too at the end, how you interpret it as like we're only, our laws are the only thing that keeps us from becoming basically the animals or monsters. I also saw it as like how frivolous sometimes the laws have made us.
Okay.
I kind of interpreted a lot of that as, we have this high society, a lot of unspoken rules in high society. There's no like common ground sort of thing. It's a lot of nuance, a lot of just body language, a lot of watching social interactions, trying to understand what's a faux pas for this person versus this person. And I saw like, not only are we keeping ourselves from being uncivil through laws, but we're also keeping ourselves from being uncivil through these unspoken rules of high society. And sometimes even in like, I guess in Victorian times too, you could say there was a lot of weird, silly things that people did to show status and to show superiority, or, some kind of, I guess just to show like I'm a big fish in this small pond kind of thing, and how animals didn't need to.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting thing to dwell on as well, because I read into that probably a little more than what was stated, but I appreciated kind of also seeing it wasn't just about the laws, it was about the other social constructs that humans come up with as added layers to keep those laws and to keep the civility further and to have like their own personal comforts and things. Was just really interesting to kind of continue to read into when you started, especially at that end part when he said that, where he was talking about there's nothing really separating us from the animals. I thought that was really, really deep, and I took it even deeper.
Okay.
I thought that was cool.
So I guess we're suggesting this is one of the great novels.
It is.
Definitely one of the best, and it's
freaky.
It's not a really long one. You can read it pretty quickly, and Wells is not. There's a lot of writers back then where their writing style was very, what you might say today, overwritten, like Poe and other authors. Even to some extent Stoker. Wells avoided that. His writing was plain. He put it out there, and didn't get into all that. His writing is a very straightforward style, telling the story, which makes it very easy to read.
Yeah, he's not as flourishy or poetic, but he is philosophical and deep and makes relevant analogies and associations without going over the top. He doesn't do like, I hate to make this comparison because it's very controversial, but Shakespeare is one of those people who says a lot without saying much. You know what I mean? Like, he has a lot of words for a very simple, concise concept, and he gets really overly poetic. I feel like H.G. Wells is his complete opposite in that.
Yeah.
He says exactly what he means, and he's very intentional about it, which I appreciate that sort of writing, because
well, and that's the kind of writing style people tend to prefer today, is one that's more straightforward, tell it like it is, talk like real people. And that's the way Wells was at a time when most other writers were embellishing their writing more than they really should have, which makes it often very hard to read these older classics, but with Wells you get none of that. You're going to get a story that is definitely easy to read and has just as much payoff intellectually as anything else written back then.
Yeah, definitely a great work. I read it in like a day. It was not a long one. I've read this short story before, or this story before, but I also read the graphic novel version because I wanted to compare the two. And my husband had a version of it, and now I can't even remember who the publisher was, but it was very accurate. It was really, really nice to see that there are these different ways of portraying a story without losing the story at all, even though you're taking it to another medium or another kind of creative way. And the illustrations were kind of creepy, so
yeah,
it's really good.
And well, movie-wise, Island of Dr. Moreau has been filmed 4 times with 4 misses. None of the movies quite come near to the book. I like Island of Lost Souls. That one was the best so far. Charles Lawton, Bela Lugosi. They did a good job, but still falls short. And so a really, really good movie version of Island of Dr. Moreau should be in the future. I hope somebody out there do it and really understand and make this book into a movie for people.
Especially with like CGI and stuff now. There's so many things you could do with this.
So, okay.
Do it. Anyway, don't mess it up though.
They will. They always do.
You gotta
got 4 strikes against them already.
Yeah, you gotta do some hits and misses sometimes. But yeah, this is definitely a recommend. So yeah, anything else you want to talk about?
No, so go read The Island of Dr. Moreau. Read the rest of H.G. Wells. Leave comments on what you think about that or anything else you want to tell us. Subscribe, like, come back next time. We do these every Friday and sometimes on other days too. We release new videos. Come back and see us.
Yep. Bye guys.
Bye.